Bueno, que llegamos a la mesa número 23, que estamos cerrando y que estas chicas saben, aquí las musas saben, que nos vamos a basar en la pirámide de Giza. O sea, la última de las 7 maravillas y la única que sigue viva, que la seguimos teniendo ahí. Estas han estado ahí. Sí, te alucina, ¿verdad? Mira qué carita pone Irene, te gusta. A mí me encantaría ir a verla. ¿Alguien ha ido a visitarlas? ¿Alguien ha... Javier, de verdad, no das puntas sin hilo, por favor. Hay más manos. Por ahí tenemos... muy bien. ¿2? ¿Solo 2? Bueno, pues el resto la vemos aquí. Me pongo en la zona de la verdad absoluta. ¿Por qué? Cuando le pregunto a Javier, por favor, dime de qué va esta mesa para poderlo hilvanar y hacer una intro, literalmente me dijo, es que es muy técnico, pasa palabra. Así que la mesa se titula Arbitraje en el sector de la construcción, reclamaciones por pérdida de productividad. Digo, bueno, pues mejor que nos lo cuenten las protagonistas. Por favor, fuerte el aplauso para Dolores Bentolila, abogada independiente de Bentolila Law, y las chicas. Fuerte, fuerte, que son las últimas. Necesitan... ¡Ahí! Vamos, chicas.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I welcome the panel on loss of productivity in construction arbitration, a topic that it's a very hot topic in the settlement of disputes, construction disputes. So today's theme for the Open de Arbitraje is the pyramids of Giza. The pyramids of Giza represents a timeless symbol of human ambition, precision, and what matters most to us, the challenges of construction productivity. And it was built about 4,500 years ago, and they are an architectural and also a logistical marvel. And they were not achieved by the divine or by Martians, as some might think, but through careful planning, thousands of workers, and shifting resources, and of course, trial and error. So they offer us a perfect metaphor for today's complex infrastructure projects that are driven by vision, and they are delayed by reality, and they are heated by claims on who pays what and when. So just as ancient Egypt faced issues with resources, with manpower, weather conditions, materials, today projects also face similar issues regarding design changes, delayed materials, geopolitical issues, you name them. They're countless. And when you combine all these issues together, they can give rise to loss of productivity claims. And loss of productivity claims, together with delay, are the most complex type of claims in construction disputes, and also are very technical and very fact-intensive or evidence-intensive. So today, we're very fortunate to have this amazing panel, these great 3 speakers, and they will present these topics from 3 complementary approaches, from the arbitrator approach, the counsel approach, and the in-house approach, which is very rich. And the first panelist is Elina Mereminskaya. She's an independent arbitrator based in Chile. She brings deep experience in international construction arbitration. She's also president of the Chilean Society of Construction Law. And she will share insights from the tribunal's perspective on how productivity claims are structured, presented, and evaluated, and when parties often go wrong. Then we have Catrice Gaillet. She is a partner at the Herbert Freehills in Germany, in the International Dispute Resolution Group. She specializes in construction and engineering arbitrations governed by both civil and common law. She acts as counsel and also sits regularly as an arbitrator. So she will walk us through the counsel approach to building and dismantling as well claims of loss of productivity, focusing on evidentiary challenges, expert coordination, and advocacy challenges. And last but not least, we have Alma Gómez from Técnicas Reunidas, a major engineering and construction company involved in large-scale projects across the globe. Alma will give us a candid in-house view of what happens when loss of productivity issues arise, how companies manage the documentation, how they manage the loss of productivity itself, and what they expect from an arbitration. So to guide our conversation today, we have divided this panel into 3 rounds of topics. The first round, we will explore what loss of productivity means in practice, and so basically how it arises and how it is framed from a contractual or a legal perspective or a technical perspective. Second, we will look at how parties evidence or prove and quantify loss of productivity, focusing on evidence, methodologies, and expert involvement. There. And the third round will be a short round just to give you some takeaways and tips on on how to manage loss of productivity claims. So turning to our first round, where we will set the stage. Elina, how do you define loss of productivity, and when does it typically arise in disputes?
Thank you, Dolores. The loss of productivity is a decrease of productivity in the contractor's direct resources, labor and machinery, in the execution of a specific activity, like pouring concrete or installing windows. In turn, productivity is a measure of efficiency or performance of the contractor obtained by dividing the input, man-hours, by the output, let's say cubic meters or windows installed. Loss of productivity can be caused by contractor itself, lack of skilled labor, excessive workforce, errors, rework. Obviously, the loss of productivity caused by the contract itself cannot be claimed in arbitration. However, some shortcomings in contractors' organization may be caused as secondary effect by owner's disruptions. For example, increase in labor fatigue as a consequence of frequent design changes. From a compensation standpoint, the loss of productivity that is of interest to the parties, to the contractor, is the one caused by the owner. Project changes, design errors, lack of sequencing in work areas, or handover. The literature suggests that in projects that undergo a large number of changes, for example, around 10% of the budgeted man-hours, loss of productivity is highly probably to occur. And as we know, the projects with less than 10% of impacts are rare, So in the most projects, we will find loss of productivity, but as we will see during this panel, it's not going to be easy to prove that loss of productivity took place.
Thank you. And Catrice, what is the difference between delay and disruption, between loss of productivity and delay?
Yeah, thank you, Dolores. Most commonly, a lot of people say, okay, whether you have a delay claim or a disruption claim, isn't it the same? And we often see that, not with clients like you, but sometimes that happens, but it has to be really carefully distinguished. It might be that you have a delay, and the delay causes disruption, and the disruption causes, again, delay. But there might also be cases where it doesn't have anything to do with each other. If you have, for example, an owner that has issued a change order, and it causes, let's say, a change of the sequence of works, it might be that the contractor increases simply its workforce and still complies with the completion date. And if it does so, there's no delay, but there's still a disruption, and the contractor may have additional costs that he would like to claim. So the point of distinction that usually is drawn is that you look whether the milestone, the critical milestone, has been met. And if the critical milestone has not been met, usually then we are talking about delay claims, whereas as a general rule, everything else as regards disruption would fall more into the category of what we are discussing here today, so claims for loss of productivity.
Right. So if there is no impact on the critical path, then there is no delay.
Exactly.
And it's a disruption claim.
Yes.
And Alma, what are, from an in-house point of view, of course, what are the early warning signs that there might be a loss of productivity claim? And can some of these issues be addressed early on?
Thank you, Dolores. Well, let me start by sharing with you the fact that we have coined a term for these claims, which is a llorada, a cry. And why? This is because productivity loss claims from subcontractors usually come out of the blue at the end of the project when the parties are discussing their mutual grievances. Ultimately, many of those productivity loss claims are not born out of an actual loss, but out of frustration and a lack of communication. And sometimes it's because they are it's impossible for the subcontractors or for the EPC contractor to prove an impact on the critical path, and that's the reason why we resort to a productivity loss claim. But there are, however, early signs in our dealings with the subcontractors, which is the fact that they are using terms as impacts, interference, inefficiencies, and things like that. That gives us the indication that they are preparing a claim of this sort. So 2 important remarks here. First, the contract must entitle contractor to claim reimbursement on the grounds of disruption, loss of productivity. Sometimes it's specifically excluded, particularly in our EPC contracts. For example, in our subcontracts, the resequencing or repeated change in work fronts would be a frequent cause of disruption claim from the subcontractors. However, we include in our subcontract terms the obligation for the subcontractor to accept this resequencing and factor it into the price, which reduce and practically remove the possibility of this disruption claim. But despite the entitlement, we find it very difficult to prove these disruption claims, because a loss of productivity claim is a claim where the contractor alleges that the employer is legally responsible for acts of disruption that have caused loss of productivity that would not have otherwise been incurred. And this is key, and this is, to me, the most important, the most difficult part, to prove that without that event, I would not have had these losses, these inefficiencies. That's very difficult.
Right, and this takes us to the second round, which relates to proving and quantifying a loss of productivity claim. So, Alma, again, documentation is everything, right? So what kind of project records or site level data do you need to successfully prove a productivity claim?
Yes, well, productivity claims, as mentioned earlier, are among the most difficult to prove or defend because they require a high evidentiary burden. So documentation is key, documentation is everything, but it needs to be the right kind. So very quickly, the types of project records that we need: baseline productivity data, you need to prove that you had an original plan that has changed. The tender productivity assumptions, you need to have those assumptions to compare with the reality. Daily progress records, of course. Event logs to be able to identify the disruption event. Correspondence and meeting records. Visual records and all sort of documents that give you the possibility to prove your case. So the common shortcomings: incomplete or generic records. Daily reports often read like a checklist. They need to tell a story. Work ongoing is not evidence of productivity. You have to be able to also identify the causation. And sometimes what you find is a completely lack of link to causation. Misalignment between records and claim narrative. We sometimes find and receive from the engineers a story that doesn't match what we find in the documents. And that's the reason why it's, of course, very difficult to put it forward. And disorganized data. We as in-house lawyers, as you can imagine, we push for discipline record keeping early, not just when things go wrong, but the reality is always very stubborn, and sometimes what we find is difficult to manage.
Yeah, the list is very long, and it seems very challenging from the in-house perspective. But even when we have all that documentation, and that documentation is perfect, loss of productivity claims are still very difficult. And we have the second issue we have is causation. So, Elina, how do you prove that the productivity loss was actually caused by the employer's actions and not internal inefficiencies?
Yes, thank you. Well, in order to claim for loss of productivity, the event must be assessed in light of the parties' risks and obligations under the contract. And the event must be connected to a certain contractual obligation of the owner and a breach thereof. For example, if owner is responsible for providing the project's design, any loss of productivity caused by design errors should be compensated to the contractor. However, if the contract assigns the risk for design errors to the contractor, for example, it is under the obligation to review the design, to detect the errors. In that case, even if there is an actual impact on contractor's productivity, it won't be able to claim for a compensation. A similar situation arises with the handover of work areas when they are not handed over at once or in a sequential manner. The need to reallocate labor and machinery, the travel time, the disruption of the construction sequence planned, all that could cause the contractor loss of productivity. However, to claim for a compensation, the contractor has to show that the owner was under the obligation to hand over the work area at once or sequentially. And the last example, if the contractor is disrupted by other contractors engaged by the owners, it could claim for compensation. However, if the contractor assumed the obligation to coordinate with those other contractors independently, it won't be able to claim. So it's really a hard task to find the event that is owner's obligation that has been breached. And in terms of causation, the delay and disruption protocol of the Society of Construction Law, which is a leading guidance document in the field, recognizes that in some cases it may not be possible to link loss of productivity to a specific individual event. And for such situations, the protocol suggests isolating the cost of the productivity loss related to the specific owner-driven impacts, and it makes possible to submit the rest of the disruptions as a global claim. Global claim, which means there is no specific link between the event and the damage and its effect or the damage suffers, the loss of productivity. Global claims are discouraged by the protocol. However, it seems to be a trend in the UK and the USA to look at global claims with a more lenient approach. This shouldn't be possible in civil law jurisdictions. We still have the obligation to prove causation, and if the arbitral tribunal applies a civil law, substantive law, it's hard to imagine it would accept a global claim.
Yeah, you're right. And in spite of that, most of the arbitrations, construction arbitrations I had on addressing loss of productivity issues, they were global claims. They didn't win, but not because of that.
Yeah.
So we wonder whether a civil law tribunal would reject a loss of productivity claim just on the basis that it's a global claim. It's a question mark on that. Now, moving on to the quantification of the loss of productivity. There are different methodologies. Catrice, what is the most commonly known methodology?
Yeah, I mean, the most commonly is really what we call the measured mile approach, but as everyone has said here already on the panel, it's one of the hardest claims to make. So let me just go one step back so that everyone here in the room really understands what do we really need to prove here. So as my colleague has said, so the definition basically is that you have a loss of productivity or reduced productivity of a specific project resource. So what does that mean? There are a lot of categories, but the two most important ones is labor and equipment. So labor is easily enough to understand. If you have to increase labor for the same time period, that implies a certain reduced productivity because that was not what you have been bargaining for when you were pitching and actually doing your tender. The same is with equipment. Equipment can become inefficient if you have paid a certain price for equipment and then the whole project is deferred to a later stage and you have to pay more. So that is basically the damage we're talking about. And then the question comes, so how do I prove that? And the measured mile approach is, let's say, the most preferred method, not only for counsel, but also arbitrators. But as Alma has said, you need the right data, and it's not always there. I will give you a very easy example. It's very simplified that everyone knows what we're talking about. Just imagine you have a building. It's a newly built reactive building, and lawyers will move in. And lawyers are, of course, the best tenants ever. They never make trouble. And you also have a contractor, and this contractor has to install 60,000 square meters of carpet. Just very easy. And during the tender phase, and also whilst making the assumptions, the constructor said, I need 1,000 man-hours in order to install 30,000 square meters. This is what you've already mentioned. This is what you put into a relation. 1,000 man-hours and 30,000 square meters, and then you know that your productivity rate, your baseline, should be 30 square meter per man-hour. So what happens, of course, the project becomes delayed. So the first month of the carpet installation is fine, but then the lawyers have to move in because they can't stay with their old premises. And now the place is not anymore vacant. So the contractor had assumed, and rightly assumed so, that he can move without interruptions in the building. And now the lawyers are there. So instead of 1,000 hours, now the man-hours needed are 2,000 hours. So basically 1,000 hours are lost, and instead of 30 square meter, the contractor only achieves the same scope with 15 15 square meters per man-hour, and basically has lost 1,000 hours. And that is the loss we're talking about. And by using this measured mile approach, you compare basically the first period without any impact, having 30 square meters per man-hour, to the 15 square meters per hour, so the period that was impacted by the delay or by any disruption that was caused, of course, by the owner. And then you multiply this 1,000 hours by a certain price tag. That is, let's say, the very easy description how it should work, but as Alma has already said, you need data, you need good data, you need to have, let's say, all the assumptions there, and sometimes they are unfortunately not there, and then you have to, of course, take recourse to other measures. But in the cases I've seen it, it really helps the arbitrators. It's straightforward. They can understand that. They are graphs. And the most important point is that it is based on a real-time example, on the real-time project, and not on estimations from other projects with studies from industry groups.
Yeah, and you need a baseline, which
Yes.
is key. So when we do not have a baseline, Elina, what other methods do we have available to assess a loss of productivity?
It would be the earned value analysis, which identifies the man-hours paid to the contractor based on the information in its bid for the completion of a specific scope of work. And the method compares then this so-called earned value to the actual man-hours used to comply with that same scope of work. As progress, the man-hours actually used is referred to as spent value, sorry. As progress is achieved, the hours originally budgeted for that progress are calculated and treated as earned value. The difference between earned value and spent value is indicative of loss of productivity. It is good practice for the contractor to discount its own inefficiencies as well as an optimistic, excessively optimistic price in the bidding. This method is quite credible and widely used. However, if it's executed in a sloppy way, it resembles heavily as a global claim, which makes it less trustworthy. And another option would be to use the industry studies. For example, one of the most famous studies is the statistical model developed by Leonard and Ipps, who observed a correlation between a disproportionate number of owner-induced changes and loss of productivity of the contractor. However, the study uses samples from the USA, and one could reasonably ask why those USA sampling is relevant for a project executed in the Chilean desert or Peruvian jungle.
Yeah, as you can tell, it is extremely technical, so you need an expert. You cannot do this just by yourself. You need an expert, a technical expert. And so, Catrice, do you have any tips on how counsel can work better with experts?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's the key and sometimes also the biggest challenge. There are, let's say, 5 topics that are important. The first is, I think, early involvement, the earlier you can get it, which is sometimes even the biggest challenge, because sometimes clients say, oh no, why so early? I mean, we have not even received the request for arbitration from the other party. Let's wait, or even the statement of claim, but then it's actually too late. Actually, it can save costs. Yeah? The earlier you have them, you can shape the strategy. You can also find out the weaknesses and the strengths, and that often I've seen that in many cases, we didn't even have to go to arbitration. We could settle before that because it was clear whether, how good your case was. So early involvement is the first point. The second is clear communication. Sometimes what happens is that we see the internal engineers and technicians say, we want to meet with the external experts, which is completely fine. But at the end of the day, the ones who have to understand and decide the case is you as an arbitrator. But in order to draft the right narrative and to make it descriptive and to simplify it, we as lawyers have to understand it. So a regular communication with the expert, really getting into the details and understanding the technical side of it, but also the experts understanding the law side of it, and match this in order then to shape the strategy where we want to go to. That's the second most important point. And that ties in with the third point, simplify. We are talking here quite challenging concepts, sometimes no matter whether it's disruption claims, sometimes we have to explain how a power plant is running. It has to be simplified, breaking down technical jargon as much as possible, and with that goes hand in hand visual aids. If you don't use graphs, charts, diagrams, that's the most important, because that helps at least me. I don't know how you see it, Elina, but as an arbitrator in council, I really like this, to see what we're talking here about. And maybe as a last point, although that goes without saying and is not directly connected to this disruption claim, is it has to be an impartial expert. It does not help the case that you have sorted out a strategy, a legal strategy, and the expert has to align to it. That does not make any sense. So really, the technical expertise has to be based on objective criteria, and usually we are lucky enough to have clients who see it like this, but this is the most important. And then for the presentations and for the hearing, do mock presentations and try, not coaching of course, we're not talking coaching here, but really test also the experts. Are they the right ones to give the expertise? Because you can have a Harvard expert, but if the Harvard expert is not the right one to tell you how it works, the whole case will be lost.
Yeah, all very good tips.
Yeah.
Thank you. And double dipping is a very common issue. Sometimes I've seen some claims, loss of productivity claims, where this delay loss is claimed together with disruption loss. And so how to avoid this double dipping, Alma?
Well, as we have already seen, delay and disruption are two different animals. Delay is a reference to critical delay to the final completion date, whereas disruption is disrupted work is a work that is carried out less efficiently than it would have otherwise been, but for the cause of disruption. And that's the problem, in my view, to prove that had it not been for that event, I would have had that productivity in any case in a sustained manner without any doubt, and that's very problematic. But it's true that in construction disputes, especially large ones, it's common to see these two kind of claims running in parallel: delay, prolongation costs, and productivity loss claims. And the challenge is ensuring that compensation is fair and not duplicative. And so how to avoid double dipping? We need to segregate the effects, just a practical strategy, time versus cost. For instance, if late scaffolding, delayed piping works, and also caused crowding, delay damages should cover the extended time, whereas productivity loss might cover overtime or rework costs not already covered by prolongation. But as you pointed out, you cannot claim the same concept twice, and that's also very difficult to achieve. This requires a clear mapping of impacts to events. As my colleagues mentioned, maybe a matrix or a chart explaining not also the events, but the causation and also the costs associated to each of those claims is of much help here. And then we need to scrutinize the methodologies used. As you mentioned, there are different ways different methodologies and ways to achieve the calculation, and we need to be able to identify which one is better equipped to defend our case in each of the problematic events that we have. So avoiding double recovery isn't just a legal theory, it's about disciplined claim structuring and good project records. And again, I fail to see that this happens in the claims that we receive for disruption, because normally are global claims without any sort of causation, identification of costs, and so forth. So,
yeah, so you see the difficulty of proving this type of claims. And so we've seen what loss of productivity is, we've seen how it is argued, but the most valuable tips relate to what we should not do when claiming a loss of productivity. So in the 4 minutes that we have left, maybe if I'd like to ask to each one of you what one strategic mistake you often see in productivity loss of claims, and one practical tip to avoid it. Maybe we can start with Elina.
Well, one practical tip for contractors and subcontractors is to be aware of the waivers. The contractors and subcontractors are often invited by the owner or by the general contractor to sign for extension of time, for example, to accept an extension of time in exchange of a waiver of their right to claim for loss of productivity. That's a mistake that I would recommend to avoid.
Yeah, I think I'm going to repeat myself, actually. The most important, yes, from our front end, to have, from the very beginning, the assumptions quite clear for all the baselines that you need, and to involve the experts as early as you can if you have the first warning signs. Yeah.
Well, as we have already addressed all the difficulties of these claims, I would say that at least please avoid the global claims and try to identify the causation link between the claim productivity loss and the specific event.
Yeah, so that's a very difficult exercise, apparently. Maybe impossible.
Maybe an impossible task.
But okay, this concludes our presentation. We still have 2 minutes left. I don't know if questions are allowed, but if anyone has a question, we would be happy to answer it.
No questions.
That's strange for this very exciting topic.
Yes.
Everyone wants the drinks.
Okay, thank you.
¿Ya no?
I think.
Se puede ser más monas que estaban diciendo no viene, y nuestras chuches, ¿se las han ganado? Por favor, se las han ganado. Chicas, millones de gracias. Las moras para vosotras.